Sony's autofocus is the best on the market. It's not a big secret, and far from me is the idea of challenging that fact, but like many other aspects and features that are packed into Sony cameras, the default setup out of the box is not really optimized. So in this video I want to share my solution, my autofocus settings that works best for me as a travel and street photographer. Owning both a Sony a7 IV with a joystick and a Sony a7C II without, it made me think a little bit out of the box to find a setup that works best and that delivers good performance and versatility without relying too much on the joystick. With the tweaks I applied, I found myself almost never using it, also when I shoot with my a7 IV, so it shows how good of a setup it is. I also know that not every photos need to be sharp. Some intentional motion blur or autofocus blur can look absolutely fantastic, but the purpose of this video is to show you my autofocus setup to get sharp images, if it is what you want, getting sharp images. I'll start first with the obvious, which is the focus mode, and since switching to mirrorless and Sony at the same time a few years back, I find that AF continuous is the best solution for almost every shooting scenarios. AF continuous was originally made for moving subjects, maybe losing a little bit of accuracy compared to AF single, but the Sony's autofocus system is so good that leaving your camera in AF continuous gives you the best of both worlds, accurate and confident focus on static subjects, and as the name suggests, you can have agile and continuous focus on moving ones. Next and second most important setting to set up is the focus area. I'll suggest what is the best focus area to use as a default, but the interesting part comes after. In the next section, I'll show you how you can benefit from two different focus areas and tracking all at the same time without having to change mode or go into the menus. The only thing it requires is a thoughtful custom button setup, but let's not put the cart before the horse and get back to the default focus area. I prefer using the one called Zone, but Sony's autofocus is so good that you could use wide and not worry about where your camera is focusing, letting it freely find your subject all across the frame. But I found that especially for my kind of photography, which is more travel and street, using Zone lets me give a little bit more direction to the camera, making sure that it focuses where I want. And in the way I usually compose my images, I rarely place my subject at the real edges or corner of the frame, and since I usually keep the face recognition on, it also prevents the camera from suddenly catching someone's face at one real corner of the frame while I wanted to focus on something in the middle. Occasionally when I shoot portraits of family, friends or for paid shoots, I would use the zone wide. Doing so I really never have to worry about moving my focus point in the frame. I leave it entirely to the camera to do the focusing job, while I can focus on composing and clicking on the shutter at the right moment. Now I need to make a little distinction about how I set up my a7 IV or any Sony with a joystick and my a7C II. With cameras that have a joystick, no further action is required. When using Zone, you can use the joystick to move around the focus area, which will not be very often as Zone covers already a big portion of the frame. With the a7C II, I found a workaround that almost fully compensates for the lack of a joystick. I set my control wheel to move AF frame left and right standard. So with this custom setting, you just have to spin the wheel left or right to make the focus area move accordingly. By the way, I'm showing all the menus on my a7 IV because my a7C II can only display the menu in Japanese, so I guess it's easier for you to follow along if it's in English. You are limited to either choose horizontal or vertical movement, but I found that when shooting photos, horizontal movement is a lot more useful than vertical. When you rotate your camera and shoot in portrait orientation, it will move vertically, which is perfect for when shooting vertical photos. And here comes the one thing that makes this setup so versatile. It makes use of a feature I only recently learned about, which is AF area registration. It is a feature that allows you to save a specific focus area for quick access. First, you will have to go through the process of saving the desired focus area, and then you'll have to define a custom button to make use of the said registered focus area. So let's go through the registration process. You will need to go into the menu, focus, focus area, and then turn on AF area registration. This will tell the camera that you want to use that feature. Second, you can go out of the menu and select the focus area you will register. My area of choice that really makes my setup is tracking spot S, and I'll explain shortly why I choose this one. You leave it in the middle of the frame and long press the FN button until you see the message registered the focus area. Third and last step, you can go back into the menu, setup, operation customize, custom key dial set, rear 1, AF on button, and from there you assign the following: focus, focus area, registered AF area plus AF on. Now that the setup is done, you can go out of the menu and try it for yourself. When you have pressed the shutter as per usual, you are focusing with the default focus area, in my case zone, but when you hold the AF on button, you are now focusing using the tracking feature, which is great for when you want to track a subject, as the name suggests, or when you want to focus and recompose. You just have to point at what you want to focus on, press and hold the AF on button, recompose as desired, and take the shot. If you're not really trusting the tracking focus to stay accurate during the time between you recompose and you take the shot, for example when you are waiting for the scene to develop or for a subject to step into the frame, I have another solution for you. It's the AFMF Switch. So despite Sony's autofocus crazy speed and accuracy, it is likely that sometimes the tracking focus will get a bit lost when you're waiting for long periods of time with the tracking focus enabled. So when I use this technique with the tracking focus and recomposing, and that I know that I will have to wait a long time before my scene will develop the way I want, I use the AFMF Switch to lock my focus. I think there is no true AF lock feature per se in the Sony system, but I found that using this AFMF Switch serves the same purpose for me. Once again, we will need to assign it to a custom button, and here's how to do it. So we are back in the menu. You can go to Setup, Operation Customize, Customize Key Dial Set, Rear 1, Custom Button 1, and from there you assign the following: Focus, AFMF, AFMF Selector Toggle. Toggle means that you press once and you are in manual focus. You can press again and you are back in autofocus. If you select Hold and not Toggle, it means that you would have to hold the custom button 1 to stay in manual focus. The moment you release the button, you are back in autofocus, which is not what I want. The goal is to reduce as much tension in your hand and fingers while you wait for the scene to develop the way you hope. So now that we have the AFMF switch set up, here's how I would use it in conjunction with the tracking focus on the AF on button. Point at what you want to focus on, press and hold the AF on button, recompose as desired, and release the AF on button. It is now that you can press on the custom button 1 to switch to manual focus, and you have your focus locked. The only thing left to do is to press the shutter at the right moment. So obviously the only thing you have to be careful about is not moving the focus ring on your lens, because if you do so, the focus will change. But honestly, I almost never found myself accidentally moving the focus ring while waiting before pressing the shutter. So now, after following through the video, and if you have set up your camera correctly, you should have only very few blurry shots. It can still happen sometimes depending on what lens you use and the lighting condition, whether there is contrast or not, but you should be good to go, and your hit rate should also be very high. And after all that, if you still end up with a lot of photos that are not sharp, you should maybe explore somewhere else to identify where the problem comes from. The first and most likely reason for blurry shots is an inappropriate shutter speed. If it is too slow and does not match the focal length you are using, or how fast your subject moves, or even how fast you're also moving while taking photos, it can result in blurry shots. The goal of this video was to talk more about the autofocus settings themselves, but still, here are some guidelines in terms of shutter speeds that you can follow to avoid motion blur. Try to have your shutter speed at least equal to your focal length, and ideally 2 or 3 times that number. For example, with a 50mm lens, you should aim at the minimum of 1/50th and ideally 100 or 160th of a second. But now with recent IB system and a good position while you're shooting, you could go a lot slower than that, but then it depends on what subject you're trying to shoot. For walking subject, you can use 125th of a second or faster. For fast moving subjects like sports, kids or vehicles, you can use 500th of a second or even 1,000th of a second. Your focus settings are correctly dialed and your shutter speed always match the shooting environment, but you are still getting blurry shots, then it could come from the lens. Maybe it has some issues that you cannot see from the outside, but inside some parts are not correctly positioned or even broken, and in such case the only solution is repairing the lens. I also heard that some lenses may have some focus calibration issues, and I think with modern lenses it is less and less likely, at least it never happened to me, so I cannot really help on that, but there are plenty of articles and videos online to help you calibrate your lens, I guess. Last and final reason your photos may not be as sharp as you like is the lens you're using. Modern lenses and even third-party cheap ones have become so sharp that it is quite unlikely that a lack of sharpness would come from the lens itself, but it all depends on what you consider sharp, and if you have very high standard, then the only solution would be to invest in more premium, more expensive lenses. I'll conclude this video by showing really how my menu is set up so you can replicate what you see on your camera, and I hope this very technical video was helpful. This is a setup that works best for me, and I imagine that a lot of you could like it also. I know that not everyone will adopt it fully, but still I think it could serve as an inspiration to further optimize your autofocus settings to fit your shooting style perfectly. Thanks for watching all the way here, and see you next time. Bye.